Chapter 2. The Nation Begins to Split. We will never know whether the South would have done its own job of house cleaning. Would it have abolished slavery on its own? We will never know because things were happening outside the South that made it hard for Southerners to keep their heads. After the Revolution, groups in northern cities formed clubs to fight slavery. They called themselves abolitionists. They collected lots of unpleasant stories about slavery and published them in books, pamphlets, and magazines. They sent them all over the country. Of course, there were plenty of unpleasant stories to tell about the mistreatment of individual slaves, about the separation of black families. Theodore Dwight Weld, a New England minister, started his career on a crusade against alcohol. Then, inspired by English abolitionists, he began to fight slavery. In 1839, he published Slavery as It Is, Testimony of 1,000 Witnesses. He put the book together from items he had sifted from 20,000 newspapers. The book was a chamber of horrors. His purpose, Weld wrote, was to see the inside of that horrible system of oppression. In the advertisements for runaways, we detect the cruel whippings and shootings and brandings practiced on the helpless slaves. Heart-sickening as the details are, I am thankful that God, in His providence, has put into our hands these weapons, prepared by the South herself to destroy the cruel monster. Nearly everybody likes to read horror stories. The book sold for only 37.5 cents a copy, and nearly everybody could afford one. There was a bargain price of $25 per 100 for people who wanted copies to give away. The book spread all over the North. Within the first 4 months, it sold 22,000 copies. Within a year, more than 100,000 were purchased. Northerners now began to get their picture of the South from Weld's book and from others like it. When Charles Dickens, the English novelist, wrote his book about America, he copied his stories from the South, about the South from Slavery as It Is. In Weld's book, Harriet Beecher Stowe found much of the ammunition for her own anti-slavery novel while she was writing Uncle Tom's Cabin. She said she used to sleep with Weld's book under her pillow. Uncle Tom's Cabin came out in March of 1852. In the story, a brutal slave dealer, Simon Legree, eventually flogs a Christ-like black man, Uncle Tom, to death because he won't give away the hiding place of 2 escaped slaves. The book quickly sold more than 100,000 sets of an expensive 2-volume edition. When it was published in a single cheap volume for 37.5 cents, it sold more than 300,000 copies within a year. It was made into plays and musical comedies. Uncle Tom's sideshows at fairs and circuses played up the most disturbing scene in the book. The escaped slave, Eliza, crosses a river by jumping from one chunk of ice to another while holding her baby in her arms. The plays would also enthrall audiences by having the saintly little Eva yanked up to heaven by pulleys. The book sold enormously in England. It was quickly translated into French, Italian, Dutch, Swedish, Danish, Flemish, Polish, and Magyar. There were more than 40 different German translations alone. Uncle Tom's Cabin became America's all-time worldwide bestseller. Mrs. Stowe gave one of the first copies to her congressman as he was about to board the train for Washington. He started reading the book on the train. The story was so sad that he began to cry. He attracted the attention of the other passengers as he wiped the tears from his face and blew his nose. To avoid embarrassment, he got off the train at the next stop, where he rented a hotel room and sat up all night finishing the book. There, in the privacy of his room, he could weep to his heart's content. Many other people, too, reported that the book had upset them. There must have been thousands of tear-stained copies of Uncle Tom's Cabin. It is possible that, without this book, Lincoln could never have been elected president. During the Civil War, Mrs. Stowe went to see President Lincoln. "Is this the little woman whose book made such a great war?" Lincoln asked her. Many abolitionists were devout Christians. They believed that Jesus hated slavery. After all, he had preached that you should do unto others as you would have others do unto you. You do not want to be a slave yourself. What right, then, do you have to enslave others? Christianity, they said, was the religion of love, love for all of your fellow man. The abolitionists wanted to preach love, but before very long they were also preaching hate. It was easy enough to go from hating slavery to hating slaveholders, and easy enough, too, to go from hating slaveholding Southerners to hating all Southerners. Since abolitionists were more interested in horror stories than in statistics, they did not advertise the fact that most white Southerners were not slaveholders, and that many slaveholders were not cruel. Their picture of the South had no bright spots in it. If there was any virtue in the South, why had not Southerners already abolished this monstrous evil for themselves? Beginning in the 1830s, a rising flood of abolitionist literature covered the country. It awakened Northerners to the evils of slavery. It made them hate slavery. It made them hate slaveholders. It also made them lump together all people in the South as if all Southerners wanted slavery. As Northern propagandists became more and more violent and more unreasonable, Southerners too became more and more unreasonable. As Northerners began to attack things about the South that were not really evil, Southerners replied by defending things about the South that were not really good. Instead of worrying about how to get rid of slavery, more Southerners began to worry about how to defend slavery and how to defend the South and themselves. And they began to worry about attack from the outside. They stopped apologizing for slavery. Indeed, instead of insisting that slavery was an unavoidable evil, more and more Southern defenders began to argue that slavery was a valuable good. Slavery is not an evil, declared the governor of South Carolina in 1829. On the contrary, it is a national benefit. A professor of the College of William and Mary in Virginia wrote an influential book putting together the best argument in favor of slavery. Senator John C. Calhoun of South Carolina was one of the strongest supporters of slavery. He had been Secretary of War under Monroe. Then he served as Vice President of the United States, and now he had become the leading Southern thinker. Many in the South, he said, once believed that slavery was a moral and political evil, that folly is gone. We see it now in its true light and regard it as the most safe and stable basis for free institutions in the world. Many others supported Calhoun when he called slavery a positive good. Southern ministers said the Bible required that black people be slaves. Southern scientists said black people were an inferior race, the product of a separate creation that God made in the beginning on the African continent. Southern historians said that the glories of ancient Greece were possible only because the Greeks had lots of slaves. Otherwise, sane people wrote astonishing nonsense, all to show that slavery was the greatest thing that had ever happened to the human race. The most brilliant and most extreme of these defenders of slavery was a Virginia lawyer, George Fitzhugh. Having traveled through the North where he saw some miserable factory workers, Fitzhugh returned to the South a convinced pro-slavery man. In his book, Cannibals All, or Slaves Without Masters, in 1857, he went on even further than those who only said that slavery was a positive good. According to him, any free society, that is, any society without slaves, was evil, precisely because it did not have slaves. Factory owners in the North were cannibals all, that is, they ate up the lives of poor workers who labored long years and then were thrown away when old or sick. For all practical purposes, according to Fitzhugh, Northern workers were slaves, but slaves without masters. Nobody was required to look after them, to see that they were fed and clothed. Slaves in the South, Fitzhugh said, were more fortunate than their Northern peers. Southern slaves had masters. They had the best kind of social security. Whatever happened, it was not their worry. They did not have to pay any bills. They had no problem of unemployment. Slavery, as Fitzhugh described it, was a kind of socialism, where all property was put in the hands of the people, the white people, best qualified to use it, for the benefit of everybody, whites and blacks. 3 cheers for slavery. Southerners now showed that they were just as clever as the Northerners in the great national competition in name-calling. When Northerners called all Southerners torturers and monsters in human form, Southerners answered by calling all Northerners cheating, stingy, money-grubbing Yankees. A Yankee, they said, was a man without a heart, or rather his heart was in his pocketbook. He understood nothing but money. A pamphlet that circulated in the South after 1832 told about a Yankee who was sent to hell. Before letting the Yankee in, the devil put him on trial and accused him of numerous crimes. He had cheated people by selling 497,368 wooden nutmegs, 281,532 cigars made of oak leaves, and 647 wooden clocks with no works in them. He had stolen an old grindstone, smeared it over with butter, and then sold it as cheese. He had sold to a pious old woman a pair of shoes represented to be the shoes of St. Paul. The Yankee replied that in New England, where he came from, people considered these the cutest tricks. They had delighted his father. His father said they proved his son a genius. Even the devil was disgusted, and he said that the Yankees were a bigger nuisance than all the rest of the world put together. Of course, both Northerners and Southerners were wrong when they said that all the people in the other region were evil, but they were right when they said that the United States was being separated into 2 different regions. nations. There were really many in the South. There was the Old South, that included 6 of the original 13 states: Delaware, Maryland, Virginia, North Carolina, South Carolina, and Georgia. Then there was a newer South of 9 other states where slavery was also permitted. Florida was one of these, and it was a peculiar place. It had belonged to Spain for 3 centuries. It had lots of jungles and Everglades where Indian tribes still roamed, but the United States finally admitted it as a state in 1845. The other new southern states, Kentucky, admitted in 1792, Tennessee, 1796, Louisiana, 1812, Mississippi, 1817, Alabama, 1819, Missouri, 1821, Arkansas, 1836, and Texas, 1845, were as much west as south. Located on the western side of the Appalachian Mountains, they looked away from the Atlantic Ocean. Their superhighway was the Mississippi River. They were the goal of many new settlers, and they had much of the Western spirit. The dignified old families of Virginia and the Carolinas looked down their noses at the crude backwoodsmen of Kentucky, Tennessee, and Alabama. In the Old South, gentlemen settled their quarrels by dueling under the traditional dueling oaks according to elaborate rules. In the newer South, life was far rougher. Men there were more likely to settle their quarrels by a free-for-all fight with bowie knives. One thing drew all these states together. It was not so much that they were Southern states, but that they were slave states. As Southerners began to boast of slavery, slavery began to dominate everything. To avoid the word slavery, which freedom-loving men everywhere hated, Southerners began to call it their peculiar institution. The peculiar institution was really making the Southern into a peculiar place. To keep out abolitionist books, magazines, Southern states began stopping the United States mail. If a professor was suspected of not supporting slavery enthusiastically enough, he was fired. To prevent slave uprisings, Southerners wanted to arm every white man. Military academies flourished, but other kinds of schools and colleges and universities did not. Southerners began to be afraid of their own shadows. If you did not proclaim the virtues of slavery, you were probably an enemy or a traitor. Southerners began to think that they were a separate nation, which would stand or fall with slavery. Anyone who attacked slavery, they said, was attacking all the Southern people. Southerners became angrier and more passionate. Hate was brewing on all sides. Southerners began to shout, "Death to abolitionists!" Elijah Parrish Lovejoy was from New England. He studied to be a Presbyterian minister at Princeton, and then, in 1833, he settled in St. Louis, Missouri. There he began publishing a religious newspaper. Lovejoy was a fanatic. He was against lots of things, including alcoholic drinks, the Catholic Church, and slavery. He wrote strong words in his newspaper, which he sent down the Mississippi from St. Louis, Missouri, to serve the cause of abolition. But Missouri itself was a slave state. In order to find a safer place for his newspaper, in 1836, Lovejoy moved 25 miles up the river to Alton, Illinois. Alton did not permit slavery, but the pro-slavery forces reached up over the border. Lovejoy was in for serious trouble. Lovejoy's press came up the river and arrived on the dock in Alton on a Sunday morning. In keeping with his religious principles, Lovejoy would not work on Sunday, and he would not make anyone else work on Sunday either. He left the press unguarded on the riverbank. That night, somebody dumped it in the river. The decent citizens of Alton gave their own money to replace the press, but pro-slavery mobs destroyed it again and again. Finally, on November 7, 1837, word spread that the Ohio Anti-Slavery Society had sent Lovejoy another press, and it had just arrived. 60 young abolitionists from nearby towns gathered to defend the press. Merchants, expecting trouble, closed their stores and begged Lovejoy to leave their town. He refused, saying he preferred to be a martyr. That night there was a battle at the warehouse where Lovejoy's new press was stored. An armed mob of pro-slavery men gathered, but the abolitionist guard held them back. Then the pro-slavery forces began to set the warehouse on fire. When Lovejoy leaped out to prevent them, he was shot dead. For abolitionists everywhere, Elijah Parrish Lovejoy became a martyr. Pro-slavery men said he nearly got what was coming to him. Both sides were collecting their heroes and martyrs. It was becoming harder and harder to imagine that the peoples of the North and the South could be kept within a single nation.